Hey everyone, Anders Sundquist here, founder of Flawless Recruit, host of the podcast Lean In, and today I have Yanilda Gonzalez, Director of Global Talent Operations at Contentsquare here, and we're going to be talking talent philosophy for 2025. There's a variety of topics that feed into this, from branding, rebranding, messaging, DEI, and of course, talent infrastructure. So we're going to touch on all these things today. So take notes if you're tuning in and you're a TA leader or an IC in the talent space and want to learn more from a talent leader like Yanilda here. So I'll let you fill us in, Yanilda, on your background into TA. No one I know yet has gone to university for recruiting. So tell us how you got here to be in this role at Contentsquare.
Thank you, Anders. I'm so excited to be here. I always love this question, and I promise not to be too long-winded, but I sort of fell into it. I think many of us probably in like the talent space and recruitment probably have this similar stories in that way. One of my first jobs out of school, which I actually worked at throughout college, was a test preparation company. And one of the things that the company had to do is obviously hire instructors who would teach the GMAT, the GRE, the LSAT. And they would have these candidates fly out or come into our New York office and actually audition and teach mock lessons. And they would always need like volunteers. And they would go around the office and ask for volunteers for it was role playing essentially. So I would always volunteer to be a student. And at the time I was like, I was still a student or I was right out of school. So I was definitely still wearing kind of my like student cap. And I realized very quickly how much I enjoyed doing that. Like just being a part of the evaluation process, the like debrief discussions afterwards. And so even though at that point, right after college, I kind of realized, okay, I wanted to do something within HR. I didn't quite know what. And recruitment just kind of like fell on my lap. And I said, I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to try to start to build that foundation and start from the ground up. And so I went ahead, applied to some coordinator type of roles and got that. And that's kind of like where I began, and the rest is history. And now, as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Global Talent Operations at Contentsquare. I lead a global team. So this consists of project managers, what I like to call operations experts. We're really like program specialists. I do have a recruiter on my team as well who manages all of the recruiting for our intern and apprentices at CSQ. But essentially what my team does is we do oversee a breadth of different operational and strategic projects centered around talent. So this can be anywhere from implementing new tools and systems and developing new policies, integrating our 3 companies, which we'll talk about the rebranding in a little bit.
Yeah, sure will.
And kind of being a part of that huge feat. And then also just topics around inclusive hiring, employer branding, enablement, and those kinds of things. So it's been very much a wild ride here at CSQ. I've been here for almost 5 years, but it's been a fulfilling one as well.
And in the talent and tech space, that's like dog years. That's basically a couple decades, right? And so tip of the hat to you for that 10-year. Clearly, Contentsquare is doing something right. For our listeners today tuning in that might not know, tell us a bit about what Contentsquare does before we get into the talent philosophy topics.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so important. So we are an all-in-one experience intelligence platform. So essentially what our platform does is it helps these businesses and organizations get a deep understanding of what their customers' online journeys are, on their websites, for example. And our mission is to empower these businesses to create a world where everybody has that digital experience that they love, that they're seeking and that they deserve, right? An experience that is accessible to them. It's inclusive. It's trustworthy in a time of lots of, I know you and I talked about this a little bit, and all that type of stuff, and also sustainable. So we're super proud of what we've built. Again, we've gone through a huge rebranding recently, and have acquired, I think up to date, we've acquired like 8 companies, if I'm not mistaken, but most recently, 2 major ones, which has completely sort of overhauled in a very good way the platform and tool that we're able to offer our customers and prospective customers as well.
Wow, what an exciting growth journey! And if you're tuning in and interested in learning more, message about the Contentsquare growth journey. I know they just had a sort of a celebrity moment in Times Square yesterday about this rebrand, and we're going to get to that in just 1 minute. But first, I'd love to talk about the talent philosophy at Contentsquare. So, you're running the talent ops team, and a lot of this rebrand had to do with kind of recreating the identity now that you've merged, bought, and stitched together 8 companies. Wow, what an accomplishment. So, tell us, what is the talent philosophy at C Squared?
Yeah. So I will say like our company mission surely cascades into that. And so in the way that I mentioned, like we're empowering businesses to create that right digital experience and that experience that those users of our customers deserve. That's the kind of experience that we also want to offer our candidates and our talent, right? So
Right.
for us, that means, making sure that they get that human experience in a time of lots of automation and AI. For us, it's also that relationship building, giving them tips throughout, and not just tips, but enabling and empowering them throughout the recruitment process, being very transparent and visible with them about the process and providing the necessary feedback. And really making sure that we're designing a recruitment process that's thorough, but it's fair and it's also efficient. And so all of those things, I think, really do encompass what our philosophy is, right? Like each step of our process serves a purpose, and we want to make sure that we're enabling candidates along the way. And at the end of the day, like our mission is to find that top talent and the right talent at the right time, all in an effort to really, fuel the growth of Contentsquare. And so I think it's important to make sure that our mission as a company also is kind of like, again, cascading down to how we approach talent and recruitment.
And so much of that is included in the branding and the rebrand that you just did. I'm excited to unpack about the why and the how here. But I just want to comment for those tuning in today that it's so important to have an interview process that, as you mentioned, was sustainable, scalable, inclusive, and fair, whether or not a candidate gets the job. And here's a few reasons why. If you're looking to hire the top X% of talent in whether it's in any domain, right? Technical, non-technical, it's so important that those candidates have a good experience that get the role. So that candidate experience is great. They feel welcomed into the organization, probably leads to high quality of hire numbers. But maybe equally important, maybe some would argue more important, is those candidates that don't finish the process, whether they back out for their own reasons or are declined for failing an interview. And that candidate experience and what they tell their friends and their friends really does impact the recruiting funnel, because that talent brand is then going to be out in the market as, hey, at least I got feedback, or I was informed about the interview process and coached on how to, approach the technical interview or the components of the final interview. So again, if you're tuning in today, really listen about why this is important, because it will help your organization efficiently and fairly recruit. So without further ado, there was a big rebrand. I think just yesterday it was announced, or at least the last 48 hours.
Literally yesterday, yeah.
So fun when we were catching back up and you're telling me about the Times Square story. I won't steal your thunder. I'll let you tell it. But tell us today, all the listeners on the Lean In podcast, about the rebrand at Contentsquare. And let's kind of talk about the why and the how. So why the rebrand, and then how did you do it?
Yeah, definitely. So, for us as a company, we've always had a very kind of deliberate strategy where we've had organic growth, but then also lots of like mergers and acquisitions. It's part of sort of our DNA. And so with the recent acquisition of Heap, which happened last year, and then Hotjar actually happened a couple years ago, but we were sort of operating as standalone companies until, again, more recently. It was important for us to kind of really unify all, not just the workforce, but also, of course, the product and the branding and sort of what we stood for. And, recently as a company, we also completely like reworked and launched and built from the ground up our new values and ways of working. And that's been like top priority for us as a people team, as well as like really kind of like honing in and solidifying what are our ways of working, what's our new company culture, because we're not going to operate as three separate entities. We do
Yeah.
really have to kind of merge into one. And that is not, that doesn't happen overnight. So I certainly
And
don't
it's
want to
not easy.
simplify
Right.
it. And there's
Right.
lots of like growing pains around that. But I will say that there's been such a huge effort in the last, year or so to make sure that we're making strides,
Yeah.
and improvements on really becoming one company. And so this rebrand was one of the ways to really get there, right? While we didn't necessarily change our company name, we changed so much about, again, our product, our offering, our messaging, our positioning, and even like internally, the way we've been structuring our teams and, making sure that we're super clear on like our objectives and OKRs as a company and all those kinds of things. And again, it's still work in progress. But for us, like this was such a huge milestone. And I feel like even saying milestone feels like it's minimizing just
Yeah.
the effort and all of the amount of work that went into this. And I just have to give a massive shout out to all of the individuals and my colleagues involved in that. And, I've been partnering super closely with our marketing team in that. And again, my work stream is more centered or focused on like talent acquisition, but it's just been so inspiring to see all of the work that they've put into it and the care and thoughtfulness,
Yeah.
and just being a part of that. So for us being in talent acquisition, we are in the field, and it is important that for our marketing team, it was super important for them to make sure to enable and train the entire C squad, but specifically certain, functions and departments on the new brand and product. And for us in TA, because again, we're in the field and we're hiring talent, we have to make sure that we're being very consistent and accurate with all of our
Yeah.
messaging when it comes to those candidate interactions and again, supporting with that company sort of rebranding strategy. So that's sort of where we've come in. And I know I talked a little bit with you about this like new recruitment pitch recertification
Oh,
process
yeah.
we've been
Oh, yeah.
working on. So I'm happy to share more if you're interested.
Oh, I'm certainly interested. I think it's a really important topic, especially for brands that are growing and changing, buying companies and merging other cultures and companies into theirs. And there reaches a point and an inflection point when there certainly needs to be a unification. And if there is a rebrand that literally involves marketing materials, then and the values and the mission, then that needs to be unified across TA. Before we get to this sort of pitch recertification process, I'm sure our listeners are curious to learn just mechanically how much time and effort, and a shout out to all the teams at Contentsquare that did this, in concert together. It sounds like a Herculean effort, but how much planning, how long before the rebranding yesterday was this process? Are we talking 1 month, 6 months, longer? What did that look like?
Like the company wide.
Yeah, company wide.
I mean, I feel like it was probably a full year. I want to
Wow.
say like February was probably, again, I might be misspeaking, but I think February was kind of like when
Wow.
it was just more
Yeah.
formally kicked off at the start of our fiscal year. But the different like work streams, and I think it depended, but for us on the like people talent side, we were looped in over the summer. So it's already been like a few months of even us being involved and
Yeah.
kind of getting visibility into everything. But honestly, like we've accomplished as a company, like what other companies take 3 years to get to, like I think we've done in less than a year, which again, not perfect. Like I'm sure now, our website's up. It looks incredible. Definitely
Fresh.
check it out. But
Fresh.
won't be surprised if there's a
Yeah.
bug here or there. But again, like super proud of that. Just like the amount of all the amount of work that was done in such a really
Yeah.
tight frame.
And I think what the reason for the question is, planning is important, and these things don't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So if you're a talent leader and or maybe you feel that there needs to be some optimization around, to say even just specifically the talent brand, the talent message, or really anything that's programmatic, take into consideration the change management and the planning that needs to foreshadow the actual, rebrand or launch or change. So, okay, now let's unpack. I'm really excited about this piece. As a recruiter at heart, over 15 years of, tech recruiting, I'm excited to hear the pitch recertification process. And so again, the how and the why. We know that there was a rebranding at the entire company, and that trickled down, of course, into the messaging the recruiting team was giving to candidates. So tell us about how that actually changed as a TA team.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll start with 3 years ago and before that, there was no process. You kind of came in, you went through, and I will say before 3 years ago, there was no talent operations team. So kudos to my team. But of course, like it was a group joint team effort with all of TA.
Team effort. Yep. Yep.
But anyway, there was just no real like consistent formal onboarding. We had a much smaller recruitment team. We were very siloed and a little all over the place. And so when we hired a VP of talent, who's currently my manager, she came in and she completely restructured the team, brought us all under her, right? We were actually reporting into sort of regional heads of TAs. So even
Wow.
our ways of working were so different and inconsistent, and that candidate experience wasn't consistent, all the things, because they all trickle down and it's all a domino effect. And so one of the things that my team worked on when I, transitioned or was promoted into this role is building out the onboarding for our
So
TA.
important. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, was very manual. It was like spreadsheets and links, and we still didn't. Now we use Confluence and have maximized our usage of that, knowledge management tool.
Yeah.
But at the time, like made do with what we could, but at least there was something formal and again, something consistent across the board, but still no sort of like standardized recruitment pitch certification process. Then 2 years ago, in collaboration with our field enablement team, so, they do all of the enablement for our go-to-market teams, our field teams,
Sure.
they basically were like, it makes sense for TA to kind of go through some similar process. So we essentially replicated or kind of underwent their certification process, but like tweaked it to make sure that it was tailored to not like a prospective customer or current customer,
Right.
but that talent, of course. Still, though, there wasn't, proper time and like careful, thoughtful deliberation on what that should look like. And I think it was a very reactive solution at the time and something that we needed. And so going into this rebranding, we use this opportunity, this, again, to your point, this like pivotal moment in time, this inflection point, to take a look at that certification process and see, okay, what are all of the different assets and messaging that we're receiving from our product marketing team, from, again, the field team, and how can we repurpose some of those assets and use them for talent acquisition specifically and for recruitment. So that's been one of the highlights, I think, and something that I want to stress to everyone who is listening is just like the cross collaboration
Yeah.
has been incredible. And I've just been so grateful, to my colleagues from these other departments and teams who've been so open and eager to share what they do over in sales, because
Yeah.
in many ways, I know people have compared sort of running TA teams like sales teams or,
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard that analogy. I mean, my manager has certainly used it for us at certain points.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was like so helpful and useful to be able to tap into what they're doing and see how we can, again, repurpose and potentially use that as an inspiration for what we're trying to build here. And we have incredible recruiters, very experienced expert recruiters as well. So we also wanted to make sure that what we were building out wasn't like they already know how to do their jobs. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was just really about empowering them and making sure that they were up to speed and completely comfortable and felt like they had the adequate knowledge of all of the different changes, because it's just been so much change after change after change,
Yeah.
and it's so hard to keep up. And I think that's something important too to know is like when you're part of a business or company where it's like constant change,
Yeah.
how do you build and again like take advantage of certain moments to ensure that your team is equipped to do their jobs well? And so that's what we did here. And so we identified, hey, the recruitment pitch, let's see what we can do. Let's completely revamp it. Let's make sure that, again, we're tapping into these other teams and like tailoring it completely. And also like using our own knowledge and resources and AI, which I know we'll get to
Yes.
too later in the
Sure will.
conversation,
Yeah.
in building out this process, and also optimizing or leveraging tools within our company. We sort of like went back and forth about whether, we were going to use a learning management system tool that our field enablement team was using. They use Mindsicle. In the end, we decided not to move forward with that and instead are going to build something again within Confluence and see, what we can do there. We also recently have a scheduling tool called Good Time. And there's sort of a feature within that tool about like training paths and being able to like shadow
Oh, very cool.
interviewers. Yeah. So we're still currently in the process of finalizing it because our sort of launch date is in December. So we're just kind of right now we're building the content and sort of like what the prerequisites will look like
Right.
and then we'll sort of translate that over to the proper channel because that's, another decision that you have to make is like, okay, you can build this content again, make sure that for our prerequisites, it's like, okay, you should take our new values training because there's a new like e-learning that we put together. It's like, let's leverage the other trainings and tools that would inform your recruitment pitch. And then again, we're creating the content, but now it's like finding the right channel and form to make sure it's sustainable and scalable, because I think
I
that's
do. It's like so much the critical inflection point and so much of an investment in the talent team to operate efficiently. And at this inflection point, it sounds like there was many considerations, many investments across tools like Confluence and Good Time, and I'm sure many others that we'll touch on in a minute. But also that pitch recertification, so the branding is unified across all recruiting teams, go to market, G&A, engineering, product design, et cetera. And one of the really important messaging and components tying this into earlier in the introduction, you were talking about the interview process and the experience for candidates being inclusive. Squad. And I want to touch on this and you specifically having recent involvement in DEI. And it sounds like Contentsquare continues to invest in DEI. I'd love you to share about how and why investing in DEI today. And then I'll ask the taboo question now is, it feels like it's fallen off in the tech industry as a priority. And I'm curious your thoughts on why that is.
Yeah. I guess I'll start with what we've been doing, and then I'll definitely answer that second one. So yeah, we do have a director of DEI. She's been with us for a couple of years. She was just recently promoted.
What is there?
Yeah. And she's been so incredible to partner with, but definitely want to, while I'm not the one at all, or my team's not the one who spearheaded a bunch of these things, I do want to highlight some of the incredible, I think, policies and initiatives that have come this year through her work. And those are around building a more inclusive workplace. So that was a huge policy and campaign that she launched and that we launched as a company over the course of the summer. And it consisted of several things. Like one of the things is she wanted to make sure that we had guiding principles in place as a company. She wanted to make sure that there was some trainings accessible and that our leaders and people managers within Contentsquare were mandated to take those, again, being the leaders and leading by example. So she definitely spearheaded that and worked super closely with our talent development team on those. And she held also some like live workshops and me being a leader and a people manager, like partaking in those have been so incredibly helpful and informative.
Yeah.
But one of the final things that I'll mention that she did, that we did collaborate very closely with her and were directly involved and lent a hand in, was building out our inclusive hiring policy and also the training around that as well. So one of the things that we did is, and we actually started this work with her, I want to say last December, I remember, because it was like right before the holidays. And then we worked, and it was like a 6-month thing. So again, that just kind of showed the level of like thoroughness and careful thought and just all the things and efforts that go into building something like that. But we started working with her and having the conversations and launching that project last winter. And then it was ready by end of May and released in June. But one of the things that we did is sort of like figure out, and she led the policy. We did, of course, like collaborate closely on them, being that we are on the hiring side, the experts there. But she did help, again, kind of like bring the executives on board and really kind of the spokesperson there.
Voice, yeah.
Exactly. So she was certainly that. But once the policies were solidified, it's like, how do we bring this to life? And this is where my team comes in, and this is where my passions lie, is I love to create, like, have an idea, a policy, a statement, whatever, like bringing that to life, like making a concrete, tangible thing. And I think that's what operations leaders are, in a way. And so for us, it's like taking a look at like, okay, how are we, if one of our policies is around making sure that we're presenting diverse slates, like diverse candidate slates or shortlists to hiring managers, how are we going to bring that to life with our tools, with our processes, right? So it's taking a look at like LinkedIn Recruiter, what are some of the new features and capabilities around like DI, which they had released at the time, and making sure that our recruiters have been enabled on those, right? And so basically, for example, one of the things that we did is run a training on that, or like a refresher for some. Another thing was like, okay, adding several stages within our ATS to make sure that there was a like shortlist stage, so that it was clear that recruiters were inputting the candidates there, and we could run accurate reports to help them kind of track those numbers.
And what ATS were you using to do that?
Lever.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. Another thing was when we were building the training out, it's like, okay, so do we want to just add this as a module to our how we hire at CS, which is essentially what was the end result or decision. But once we did that, it's like, okay, how is enrollment going to work? Like, how are we going to make sure that we're enrolling hiring managers and anyone a part of the interview panel into this training before they go ahead and actually interview candidates? So like, there's just so much behind the scenes work that I think, people don't quite realize sometimes. And I feel like maybe lots of like talent leaders who listen to this, or even if you specifically specialize in operations, you're like, yep, I know exactly what you mean. Cause it's like, we're going to do this. And it's like, okay, but
how do we get there?
Exactly. Like there's a whole process.
We'll just flip a switch and have.
Exactly. So it was really great collaborating with her on those things. And again, that kind of just goes to show the level of investment that Contentsquare still has around DI. And, just this previous quarter, because I mentioned some of the things that were released in the summer, but this previous quarter, we held like an event in Paris, which we partnered with the Women in Tech Forum. And it was a panel event. And we also recently, this was spearheaded by women leaders, female leaders within our engineering org. But we launched our internal women in engineering community, which was super exciting. So there's still certainly that focus and investment within Contentsquare. And I'm super excited to see what comes for 2025. But I go back to your second question about why do I think it's fallen for some tech. That's hard for me to answer since, again, I'm not like the DI expert or practitioner. And so I feel like I'm not maybe too well versed, but if I can give my own personal opinion and maybe a hot take.
I'll chime in as well, but please, hot take.
Well, okay, I think for some companies, not all of them, I think for some companies, it's like, if it's falling off, I think perhaps it wasn't ever sincere, genuine to begin with. I think it might have been like like Band-Aid.
Lip service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my hot take. But the other thing I wanted to mention too is I feel like change is, of course, constant. And especially within the tech industry, that seems to be, it's part of our DNA. It's where innovation comes and all of the transformation that we're able to kind of like put out to the world. But I think like what was important, or again, sort of like a hot topic, quote unquote, in 2020 or 2021, just it's natural that it's not necessarily the case now in 2024 going into 2025. And that might have to do, like with politics or current events or things like that. Like I was, when I was thinking about this question, I was like, okay, well, affirmative action in the US was reversed or overturned last year. So like all these things, I think, do impact sort of like the sentiment around the topic. And so, but I do know, to be fair, for some companies who perhaps are more like data driven, maybe they haven't seen and been able, like, for whatever reason, seen the kind of like correlation or the tie between the data and like the business outcomes. So I don't want to completely knock all companies that maybe this has deprioritized the DI, but it's hard to say. But I think that could be.
I think you're right, and I'll just chime in with more of an observation. Is it seems this year, and especially over the past 6 months, that in tech there's been a trend for some companies to focus more on meritocracy,
Mm.
calling it MEI over DEI, and not saying that that's okay or right. It's an observation, and I don't know what the trend will continue to be, but change is constant, and that's an observation that I've seen is some companies optimizing for purely merit versus diverse slates of candidates, like you said. So time will tell. Maybe our crystal balls will reveal something in future conversations, but for now, that's what I'm seeing. But one thing that's going to impact recruiting as a whole, and probably DEI recruiting and the efficiency behind that, is talent infrastructure and AI. And AI is certainly helping some companies source more efficiently, schedule more efficiently, summarize calls more efficiently. Quickly curious how you're adopting AI in the talent space at Contentsquare.
Yeah. So for us, well, I will say, like, as a disclaimer, our company is currently kind of building out a proper like policy, like a formal policy. And soon like training around that for us here. But in the meantime, I mean, we've been all sort of like each department and function honestly has been leveraging and adopting it in some kind of way into their different functions and workflows. For us, so far, our recruiters have been using it for like support hiring managers with the creation of job descriptions. We've been, of course, leveraging it for like sourcing, helping us build out like Boolean searches and that kind of thing. Even learning more about like talent pools. It's been incredibly helpful with like content creation and like, just like outreach as well. And even for us, like because one of the things I didn't mention this earlier, but we are very committed and dedicated to providing like structured hiring processes. And so in order to do that, like building out interview guides. So leveraging, AI to help us like build out behavioral based interview questions based on like the competencies or skills required of the role have been key. Wow. So that's been like super helpful. And again, our recruiters have been using AI to do all of those things. And we did run a training for them. I think was it end of 2022, or maybe I think it was sometime in 2023, but that's kind of what we've been doing. But on the talent ops side, I know you asked specifically about like TA, but even as we build out, processes and workflows and programs and policies, I've used it a lot with like strategy building, running different workshops when I need to like, for example, we're currently, which I mentioned to you in one of our earlier calls, but one of the things that I'm working on with my team is revamping our hiring process in anticipation for 2025. And so I had to run some workshop sessions with my peers, with like the other heads of TA and, our DI leader was a part of those conversations and other, key stakeholders. And so when I was trying to design this workshop and optimize and make the most value of our time together, like I did leverage ChatGPT and that was like super helpful. And it just kind of like helps kickstart some of the ideation as well. Yeah. So that's been really like helpful for us as a team to leverage AI. But one of the exciting things that I know is coming is like, for example, I attended LinkedIn's Talent Connect Summit a couple weeks ago.
Phoenix, tell us about it. Yeah.
But I attended it virtually and didn't get to fly out to Phoenix. But they, of course, were focusing lots of the kind of like sessions around their new AI features and capability. And they introduced the like hiring assistant. So I'm like so excited to like have the feature be available to us. And, like they were talking about eventually having that assistant, that capability, synthesize profiles of candidates for you and like already shoot out like a benchmark list. I know that was very manual for recruiters. Like, when we kicked off a search, we went out and like found some like benchmark profiles. We did it manually. So to have this feature come in and just shoot out 20 profiles for us, and we can still, and there's that level of like oversight and going
in the loop.
Exactly. So I'm like so excited for that and what's coming. And I think like as a talent ops team, I do feel like it's our responsibility, even though again, it's of course for TA and for the recruiters and the people who are in the field to stay like on top of all these trends and on top of, all things AI and anything else that might be happening in terms of innovation within talent acquisition, I do feel like that's the value of having a talent operations team, is like that is our responsibility to make sure
Yes.
they stay abreast of
Looking
those.
around the corner. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that we can embed them into our processes and workflows, because we are in a place where, yeah, we're doing more with less these days. But at the same time, I think it's important to like, we have to do more of what matters, you know? And
Yes.
so trying to, as much as possible, like remove more of that administrative, like tedious
Yes.
tasks from
Yes.
this, and shifting more to like impactful work and the
Yes.
time that you want them to spend on more
I
valuable.
couldn't agree more. I've been meeting many founders of AI talent tools, and I have a few joining upcoming episodes of Lean In podcast. So if you're curious, tune in to these
Yeah.
upcoming episodes. And I'll just say, and I'll tie this into my personal crystal ball for a year from now, or even 2 and 3 years from now, is, and this is just Anders' opinion, is that
Mhm.
AI tools will empower talent teams to do more relationship building with candidates and
Yep.
relationship building with stakeholders,
Yep.
being a talent architect, a talent subject matter expert of the data, the attributes, and all the signals for what a stakeholder wants in scaling their team and how to get there, versus spending a lot of the time on mundane tasks. And so these AI tools will almost completely potentially be able to absorb administrative tasks and empower much more focus on that relationship building, and talent recruiters and talent teams will really be talent partners, talent advisors,
Yeah.
as opposed to order takers that are more reactive. So that's my personal opinion. And I think that TA teams will be incredibly more efficient in the future because of this. So uh, we will see. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I'm seeing trends in that direction. But what does your crystal ball say? A year, 3 years from now, that.
Yeah. No, I feel like that completely resonates, and I'm in alignment with what you just said. Like, I know I mentioned we're revamping our hiring process and just trying to make enhancements there, but literally one of sort of the enhancements, like the title and sort of that work stream, is like the evolution of our talent, or by recruiters to talent advisors. Like
Yeah.
literally the words talent advisors are part of that. But I feel like that's sort of like where we're headed.
Yeah.
I feel like a year from now, we have to have like built the foundation. Like I'm hopeful that many companies will again have like formal policies in place and, properly, enabled their different team members or workforce on how to leverage it.
Yeah.
At least
Safely.
because I think there's so much, I think we kind of touched on this before, but there's so much that we need to be wary of at the same time, and just to be like cognizant of as we use AI, to your point about like still making sure like humanizing the process as much as possible, and like relationship building is at the forefront of it, at least for TA in our like landscape. But
Yeah.
I think we'll have like formal policies in place, like we'll have a foundation built. There'll be more AI fluency amongst teams. At least I'm hopeful about that. And I think what teams can start to do maybe now is, if I could like give like a tip or two, is like, even if you start to like map out some of the tasks that perhaps you're like, okay, this could be replaceable, or maybe this causes the
Yeah.
most pain, or maybe this
Yeah.
costs too much money. Like, just, I think, illuminating those tasks in anticipation of possibly and hopefully adopting AI in your workflows can be very helpful within this next year or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think 3 years and beyond, I feel like you gotta like
Yeah.
somehow incorporate it and embed it in, because you're gonna be left behind. In the Talent Connect that I mentioned, one of the speakers said, think about social media 20 years ago and how
Cool.
it was so new, and you had
Mm.
skeptics and you didn't quite know how it was gonna completely change your entire life and how you build relationships with individuals, or like
Even dating, everything.
yes,
Yeah.
literally. And it's like with AI, like that's sort of where
Wow.
we're headed. Like in 20 years, think about the fact that if you don't understand tools around AI or AI,
Yeah.
like you're gonna
Yeah.
be left behind. And so don't think of, I think like for those who might be scared to, don't think of it as like, oh, it's gonna take over my job. Instead of think about like, if I don't kind of like join in
Yeah.
the change, then someone who is gonna, embrace it is gonna
Yep.
take the job.
Well said. I think that is a knowledge nugget that if you're tuning in today, make note of is don't fear the change
Yep.
that's coming, embrace it. Whether
Yep.
you want to make an analogy to the social media and making your first MySpace page or a LinkedIn account 20 years ago or however many years ago, do that and ride the wave with everyone who does. And I think that it will benefit all of us. And as a serial optimist, those are my parting words. And Yanilda, I want to say sincere thank you for telling your story, telling the journey of Contentsquare's rebranding. I think it was really inspiring to hear all the operational efficiencies and improvements you've made to the organization. And a shout out to your team for the team effort in getting there. So thanks again for joining the Lean In podcast. It's been a pleasure having you. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great
Thanks
day.
for having me.
Bye.
Bye.